reflect on whatever the situation was, that you've changed yourself. And also, one other thing is we'll learn as we go through the lesson this morning, and Joseph and his travels through his life and his challenges that he had. Keep in mind things I've talked about before about where God has led you, what you've gone through your life, what the I guess the progression is to where you're at this point in time in your life. You know, I was thinking, as I studied this lesson this week, I was thinking about the time at 17 years old, if you would have told me that I was going to be here in Kentucky at Broadway Baptist teaching a class on a Sunday morning, I'd have asked you what kind of water you were drinking, because that ain't going to happen. But God has got his way. He's got a plan for you. Even though there have been valleys, if you will, and there's been the high points that we've had. We've all had them. God's always been there. God's got a plan for you. But you've got to spend time in his word, and you've got to understand by reflection not to carry on unforgiveness. All right? When you know, it might have been something somebody did to you 20 years ago or 10 years ago or yesterday or whatever. You've got to stop and pray about it, because of the fact that God he's got a plan for your life. And we're going to see that as we look into the lesson this morning. We're going to be in Genesis 45, verses 1 through 15. I'm going to kind of fumble through these right quick for us, and then we'll talk about them as we go. All right. This is where Joseph reveals his identity. And one of the things that I thought about too, if somebody was to come to you that you hadn't seen in 20 years, have you ever run into somebody like that? I have. And you go, hey, how you doing? Yeah, well, it's good to see you. You know, and you may have had a good relationship with them. So the brothers, when I read this and I was praying about it and going through the lesson, I thought, you know, there have been times in my life where I've run into folks like that. And you stop and you go, I kind of remember you, but I don't quite put you where you're at in my life. Well, that was the same thing with his brothers. His brothers had taken him, as we've learned in the previous chapters, and they basically abused him, to say the least. You know, with putting him in the well and selling him off to the caravans, and then he ended up in Potiphar's house, and then the issue with Potiphar's wife, and then moving on to the prison and the time that he spent in prison. During the time that he spent in prison, he was reflecting and praying about God, what God had done for him. And we'll see as the lesson goes on this morning that from that, it completely changed him, but it didn't sink into his family. So, with that said, all right, chapter 15, verse 1. Joseph could no longer hold his composure in front of his attendants, and he called out, "Send everyone away from me." No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. Now, Joseph, of course, as we've learned, was the Grand Vizier, and I've read somewhere where he was like the Prime Minister of the country of Egypt. He was next to Pharaoh. The only thing that separated him from being the absolute leader of the country was the throne. And Pharaoh, so when he was, you know, in that position, he had a status, if you will. You know, he had to maintain his composure, if you will. And so by sending there's three reasons why he sent the attendants out. Now, as we'll see as we go down through the lesson here, they could actually hear him crying and so on. But the first thing was, it was a family matter. This is my family. You guys have nothing to contribute to my family situation. Secondly, it was the fact that in his position, he had to maintain I guess for lack of a better term, a dignity of himself. And so when he sent the attendants out, of course, as we'll read here in just a minute, they heard him crying. Okay? So continuing on. All right, identity to his brothers, verse 2. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But they could not answer because they were terrified in his presence. Okay? Here you're talking to at their level or whatever, probably the most powerful person in Egypt, other than the Pharaoh. He could have commanded them to be executed, put in jail, sent out, just a myriad of things. So one commentary that I read I thought it was kind of interesting. The commentator said that the legend was that their soul left their bodies because they were so shocked by the fact that Joseph was even still alive and not in that position. And then God brought their souls back into their bodies. Now that's just a commentary that you'll read. I found it in several different places as I was going through this lesson. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. And they came near me. I am Joseph, your brother. And he said, the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry at yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine that has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you all alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it is not you who sent me here, but God. He made me the father to Pharaoh. That was a red flag to me when I read that he was a father to Pharaoh. Okay. Here you have a Hebrew that came out of prison that interpreted a dream to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh put him into this position, and yet he was considered to be the father to Pharaoh, being in the fact that Pharaoh would come to Joseph for any decisions because he knew that his God was leading him. And that's so when I read that, I thought, father to Pharaoh, same as your children are to you. You are a father to your children because you lead your children. Okay, when they're young, you lead them, so you become the father to your children. Let's see. Okay, the father to Pharaoh, the lord of his entire household, the ruler over the land of Egypt. Return quickly to my father to say to him, this is what your son Joseph said, God has made me lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You can settle in the land of Goshen and near me, and your children and your children's children, your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will sustain you, for there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you and your household and everything you have will become destitute. Look, your eyes and the eyes of your brothers Benjamin see that I am the one speaking to you. Tell my father about all the glory all my glory in Egypt, and that you have seen, and all that you have seen, and bring my father here quickly." Then Joseph threw his arms around his brothers, wept around Benjamin, and wept, and Benjamin wept on his shoulder. Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept, and afterward his brothers talked to him. Forgiveness. You think about Joseph and the progression of where he went. Like I said earlier, he went from being basically the favored son of Jacob. His brothers were jealous. I don't think it was out of malice. It was just the fact that he's privileged, if you will, with the robe and all of that. Then from there, they plotted to kill him, and then they decided to throw him into a pit and leave him. From there, they said, "No, we'll sell him to a caravan," and they took him to Egypt, and there he was sold into Potiphar's house. And then you know the story of what happened there at Potiphar's house, and him going into prison, into the king's prison. This is the progression that brought him to the fact that he became, I don't want to say comfortable, but he became understanding of what God had planned for his life. And that's why I say about your lives, my life. When you reflect on where you've been, where you're going, when you wonder, what has God planned for my life? I spend time every morning when I'm getting ready to leave, in quiet time, asking the Lord to show me what His plan is for my life, for my day. What do you want me to do? You know, you're in charge. You just show me the way. And that's what Joseph did. And, you know, I can understand his brothers in their situation saying, this may not be a good idea when you're talking to Joseph like this, because of the fact that, what we had done to him, and one of the times that Joseph was with his brothers, they were speaking in Hebrew, and of course, being in Hebrew, they didn't realize that who he was because of his outer appearance. One of the things that I found interesting was the Hebrews didn't shave, but the Egyptians did. And of course, you look at some of the archaeological evidence that you see from paintings and so forth, the garments that they wore, the headgear they wore, the way they acted. I found it was interesting that Joseph, through his time of being in prison, learned to speak Egyptian. So when he talked to them through a translator, they figured, they at that time didn't know that he was Joseph. And when he revealed himself, it's like, somebody come up to you and say, "Hey, I'm your long lost brother," or "I'm your long lost sister," or "I'm, somebody that you knew way back when." Really? Well, it could have been due to scars. It could have been maybe a birthmark that was unique to the family, that Joseph revealed himself to him, and as a physical evidence of him being their brother. Yes, sir. Do you have a question? No. Okay. So this time when I went through this lesson, it was pretty apparent to me that there are weaknesses that I have where I don't forgive. You forgive, and they tell you to forgive and forget. Well, sometimes I personally have still got some issues that I need to address, and I'm trying to work on those issues because of the fact of what I read from this lesson and what I read in the Bible. God expects us to forget and forgive and reconcile ourselves to those around us. For a long time, I kind of threw forgiveness and reconciliation together, and they're not really together. There are definitely two different definitions of them. One is when you forgive somebody, you say, okay, I forgive you for whatever you did and all that stuff. But when you reconcile with someone, now you're saying, as the old metaphor says, water under the bridge. Cats cry over spilt milk or whatever, and you move forward. It's like when you reconcile with somebody, you're starting a new chapter. You've drawn a line in the sand and said, from here on out, this is the way it's going to be. So I can see the apprehension of his brothers when they found out who he was, what position he held, and where he was at in his life, that they were, okay. And once he demonstrated the reconciliation after the forgiveness, then I think things began to click with him as far as going, saying that this is our brother. We did sell him. We wished we hadn't of. We anguished over that. We've gotten angry at ourselves. Excuse me. But now with the reconciliation and forgiveness, excuse me, I can see the change in what I read and what we'll read further into Genesis here on what transpired after this event. But I can still, it just kind of woke me up, if you will, about forgiveness. I mean, I know I sound like I'm repeating myself, but I cannot emphasize it enough. To forgive and reconcile. You've got to walk that path, and sometimes that path is tough to walk. People will cause you to be angry. They'll cause you to be hurt. They'll cause a myriad of personal issues. But to reconcile or to forgive and to reconcile yourself, you need to spend time with the Bible. Spend quiet time. Take a few minutes every day. Whether you're getting ready for work or getting ready to go do something or you're driving down the road. You can pray to yourself as you're driving, for instance. I do it a lot. Yes, sir.
The word forgive in the Bible means forgetting, as if it never happened.
Yes. And then you have to reconcile yourself to...
You have to reconcile yourself to that.
Exactly. The things have gone past. So when we... through this lesson, it was I don't want to say it's a simple lesson, but it's a lesson of understanding, if you will. So when we talk about Joseph and his trek through life, again, reflecting on your life, reflecting on what you've done, where God has led you. I have been in situations that I thought, oh my goodness gracious, how did this happen to me? I had, I'm going to give a real quick little testimony on that. I got, through my training, if you will, I got exposed to a lot of things. I got a lot of engineering background in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, industrial engineering, tool design, all that kind of stuff. All that worked for me. I went into a situation where I was basically the second in command in this company that I was in, or the facility I was in.
Was it Joseph?
Something similar to Joseph. But I didn't have brothers to come to me. But anyway, through that, I was able to do great things, okay? I mean, really good things to this company. And there was a lot of, I've never, and Charlene can attest to this, I've never been a political guy. I don't believe in politics. I'm the kind of guy that you show me what you do and we'll go from there. Okay? So I got caught up in politics that, unbeknownst to me, eventually affected me being relieved of my duties. And there's a long story about that also. But when there was a time that I was by myself, and I you know, when it happened, I just, you know, of course I felt sorry for myself to begin with. You know, I'd really put myself into this, and I'd worked long hours, and I, you know, done all the stuff that you do and all that kind of stuff. And I checked all the blocks and all this kind of stuff. But then I got to thinking about it, and then I got to praying about it. And I've come to the, you know, God finally revealed to me, this is part of my plan for your life. This is, you've got to the point that you're being in this situation is finished. You're no longer effective here. But I've got other things for you. And fortunately, he had a really good situation for me. And I was tickled to death about that. And I stayed there till I retired out of there, which was fun. But you know, I know I'm sounding like a broken record here with that, but I just can't emphasize enough about it. You know, with Joseph and all the trials and tribulations that he went through, and yet he was able to forgive and reconcile and forget all the turmoil that he'd faced through his time.
He loved his brothers.
He loved his brother. He loved his family. As stated there, first thing he said was, "I'm Joseph. How's my father doing?" You know, there's that family connection in there. And I'm sure that when they heard that statement in there, it totally shocked them, to say the least. It would terrify them. But from that, good things happened up to a point. One of the things that Joseph was, I think, concerned about was the fact of taking the family of Israel out of Canaan and moving them to Egypt so that they wouldn't be assimilated into the culture and eventually lose their identity. That was part of God's plan, to get them out of there. And of course we know what happens to them when they eventually all settled in Egypt. In the 400 years that they went through of a lot of trials and tribulations, for sure, before he brought them out of Egypt. But it's all, you know, when you read the Bible, I always find it fascinating that you look at issues that are, you know, you think, why is that? And then as you go down the road and continue reading, you find out that there's a plan. There's a plan. God's got a plan. Just like the situations we're going through in the world now. I truly believe God's got a plan. Getting us ready for the end times, if you will. I have no doubt in my mind about that. I don't worry about the issues, if you will. And that may be a fault of my part, but I don't worry about those sort of things because of the fact that I know where I'm going when it's my time to leave. Okay? I know that's going to happen. As I'm standing here, I know that's going to happen. Okay? But, as God says, you've got to get rid of the fear. Move it out of your life. I've got a plan. Same way with Joseph. Could you imagine being thrown into jail after all the things that he went through and spend all that time in jail? What must have went through his mind? All the issues that he was facing. Why me? Why did you do this to me? And God, again, has a plan. So, that's about all I've got today. It's a short class, but anybody got any questions or comments or whatever? I hate to throw it off early, but
I think one of the keys here is Joseph knew God had a plan.
exactly.
And that's what we need.
We need to focus on. Exactly.
God wants us to trust Him,
Mhm.
and He lets us go through these trials and tribulations so we can learn to do that.
Exactly.
And it's not so much that He wants to know. He wants you to know
Mhm.
what your faith status is in Him. And He lets you go through all kinds of things to come on the other side, and you say to yourself, I knew this all the time. I knew that. I knew it. You really had. You recognized that you really trust the Lord. You've learned to depend on Him totally and absolutely.
Right. And it's as they say, the perseverance that you go through, the challenges and that sort of thing, develops character in you. And character leads to faith. Because that's God's plan for you. To move you from point A to point B, according to His will. So, when you're out and about and things happen and, it's like, I'll say about Carol, about her accident. I'm sure that God's got a plan for it. Even though it's aggravating, then thank goodness she didn't get hurt or anything. You can always fix cars. But it's the aggravation that she's going to go through. Somewhere on the other side of this, God's going to say, things are better for you now. And that's part of my plan for your life. And that's what we're seeing here. Yes, Joe. Right. But once she gets through this, whatever it is, God, you'll probably reflect yourself back, looking at it and say, "Oh, there was a plan." I know it's the challenging times when we're down in the valley that we question the most. We all do it. I mean, I don't care who you are when you're down in that valley and you're facing, whatever it may be, illness or financial issues or job issues or whatever it may be. That's when that's part of the God's plan to build the character in you to be more faithful to Him. This is the time I have found personally when I'm in the valley. That's when I'm probably closer to God than I ever am.
Absolutely.
And even when I get to the mountaintop and things are going great, I want to be as close as I can to Him. And I think it's part of the human nature. When you get up here, you go, well, things are going pretty good for me right now. So I don't know, I don't really need to do this or that.
What God wants to do is He wants to get us in a position where we're going to do that.
Right, exactly. He wants you to be
Rest in
focused
Him.
on Him.
Rest in Him.
All right, on all things, whether it's high or low. Yeah.
I've always heard that we are most like God when we forgive. This is just a beautiful story of forgiveness. It just encourages us all to learn to forgive. That's but anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing is the forgiveness is, to me, is a two-way street. People that have wronged you over the years or whatever it may be, Um, I'm sure that there's some feeling there, but to me, it's relief. It really is. You relieve yourself of it, because that's, in all actuality, to me, when you're carrying a grudge all the time, that's a burden.
Yes.
It's an awful burden that we bear. But by forgiving people and letting the water go underneath the bridge and move on and draw the line in the sand, then you're going to feel better about things. You have a different perspective on life, if you will, and you're getting closer to God. And hopefully every day you're spending some time, if you will, and that's each of you your own, like they say, get in your own prayer closets and spend time with the Lord in His Word and speaking to Him and listening. That's the big problem. Listening is we have a tendency, as I've said earlier in other classes, other times here, we have a tendency to listen, but we don't hear. Okay? We don't hear what's being said. We listen to what, okay, yeah, that sounds great, but what is it really saying? And that sort of thing. It's like when I tell people about knowledge, Todd and I have talked about this a lot. When you talk about knowledge, in this room there is a gazillion years of knowledge. No doubt in my mind about that. But really, how much of that do you really understand? And that's why when you read the Bible, we can read the Bible and, okay, I've read this part and I've read that part, just like Joseph here. I could have went through this and said, oh, well, Joseph, this guy was pretty good. He forgive his family, and they just went on about the business. But there's more to it than that. He went through all those trials and tribulations to get to that point. And God put him in that point so that he could preserve life and keep the lineage going, if you will, of the family and that sort of thing, so that it would grow because it was part of his greater plan. And we know from later readings and so forth that it was a plan of his. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just wanted to say a lot of times, I think Joseph, it said, God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. I think that was to help his brothers have that same type of grow in their belief and show them what God has done for him. But in real life, in real world, when you're going through really difficult times, sometimes you don't see his hand until you're past it.
Exactly.
And you look back and you go, oh, Lord, you really watched over me when I didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, when we've gone through some really severe family stuff that lasted quite a while, and you're able to look back and go, wow, his hand was on us and our family.
Right. See, it's as you've all heard the same as I have, God's knowledge is beyond our understanding. Okay? We can only look at things from our perspective as we are here. But God's got a plan. He really does. Some folks are, it's like people are trying to rewrite the Bible and all that other stuff that's going on in this world. God's got a plan. And I think he's getting us who are Christians and believers in him ready for that plan and all the challenges that we're going to face. And that's what he did with Joseph, getting him ready to bring his family in so that they would have an understanding of God's plan for their lives as they move forward from where they were. Okay? That's what his whole idea was, if you will. Yes, ma'am. Sandy.
All of our many things, a child and death and cancer and watching some suffer from it. Lord, and I felt like he held out his hand and said, well, do you trust me?
Right.
Well, I trust him. Am I going to just quit? Am I just going to stay angry and mad and give up? Or will I trust him? Where else am I going to turn? Who else is going to help?
Joey?
I'm just gonna say, I'm the thought about this story. When Joseph revealed his dream to his brothers, I may be wrong here, but I don't think he intended for it to create jealousy among his brothers. I think he was just eager and excited to share this with them. And yet, our human nature takes over, and they sort of burn with jealousy and so forth. And yet, when he revealed himself years later, and they saw it because they thought he might take retaliation, he still had God's vision for their life in his mind, and that was how he was able to use it. He keeps comparing contrast that to Cain and Abel. You know, I thought about that so many times. Cain slew Abel, and God himself came to Cain and gave him a second chance. In other words, before he killed his brother, he'd given a sacrifice that wasn't worthy, and God said, just go back and redo it. He gave him the opportunity to redo it, yet in his carnal nature, he was unable to do so. And because of that, he ended up being cursed and so forth. But, you know, I thought about this so many times. There's a scripture that says, be not weary in well-doing,
Right.
because God will bless. Sometimes you do what you feel is right, you do what you feel the Lord is leading you to do, even in the midst of people that don't agree. And sometimes you just have to, persevere. But I thought so many times, what if Cain would have gone to the Lord with another sacrifice and found worthy?
Yeah. How much different things would be. Well, it's just like in the Garden of Eden. If Eve hadn't eaten off that apple and given it to Adam, how much different the world would be, But we as humans, we all have our fallacies. I mean, there's no way around it. There's only one that's been perfect, and he's coming back. Hopefully. But yeah, when you're exactly right on that. I mean, it's from their perspective, as we were talking earlier about, from their perspective, they were looking for Joseph to have revenge on his heart. But due to his walk with God and through his spending time with God and listening to God, his whole demeanor of what he was looking to do with them had changed. It was all forgiveness, and we have to walk that same path as we go throughout our daily activities. There are times, even though it might be something little or something major, like Jim and Mercy going through over here, you've got to rely on God. I'll say that till the day I die. You have to rely on God on everything you say and do. I think I'm getting the phone bit over here. So, anyway. All right, we'll wrap it up from there. Has anybody got any other questions, comments, whatever? Todd will be back next week, and you'll get a very good class out of him. He's a good teacher. All right. Well, if not, Mr. Peavy, would you mind closing us this morning, please, sir? Now, before you leave, if you haven't got the new quarterly, please pick those up.
Good lesson, brother.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Do I give this back to you?
Yeah, I'll give that to me, and then I'll give it to her, Marcia. Right through behind you.
Oh, yeah, that's an old.